Hey, Lake Point, Pastor Mike here to get you caught up on the first week of our series, It's Just a Phase, so don't miss it. The series focused on parenting. Parenting may be the hardest thing you'll ever do. From sleepless nights to desperate prayers to empty bank accounts, it's a tough job. But it's also maybe one of the most heroic things you can ever do. I mean, think about it this way. One day, each of us are going to die, and only one thing will remain: the names and the faces of the people we invested into. It's why the most heroic thing you'll ever do with your life is to be an engaged, proactive parent. Not a perfect parent. God's not calling us to be perfect parents. He's calling us to be proactive parents, where we partner with Him in the growth and the development of our kids. And a helpful way to make proactive parenting a lot easier is to divide it into phases. 4 phases to be specific. When you divide parenting into phases, it becomes a lot less stressful and a lot more clear. You know exactly what to focus on. You know exactly what your objective is. So, what are the 4 phases of parenting? Well, first you got the discipline years. This is when your kids are in the age range of 0 to 5. And this phase is brought to you by sleepless nights and the word no. It's called the discipline years because it often feels like that is all you do. You are constantly correcting and disciplining your kids. That's because your main goal in this phase is to teach your children that there are consequences, good and bad, to their actions. Your role in this phase is to strengthen your child's obedience muscles through multiple reps and through appropriate consequences. Next up is the training years. And it consists of the age range of 5 through to 12 years old. In the training years, you explain the why behind rules and the why behind expectations, and you train while you explain. You tell your child what to do. You explain why it's important. Then you help them practice it so that they'll grow healthy habits and develop godly values. From there, you move into what's known as the coaching years. Your kids are now probably anywhere from 12 to 22 years old. You know you're officially reached the stage when your kids are embarrassed to be seen with you in public. When it comes to this phase, Andy Stanley probably says it best. He says, in the coaching years, you connect more than you correct. You loosen the reins of the training years and you move to the sidelines for coaching. However, that doesn't mean you become passive in your parenting. Think of football or soccer coaches. They don't leave the field and then get distracted with other stuff. They're watching carefully, coaching from the sidelines, and sometimes calling a timeout to huddle up with the team. Your goal during this phase is simply to keep them coming to you for guidance and support. Now, the final phase is the friendship years. Your kids are 22 or older, and this is where you get rewarded for parenting well. This is where you get to enjoy a return on your investment. If you raise your kids the right way, then they actually become the kind of people you want to be friends with once they're adults. Unfortunately, many parents don't reach this stage, often because they made the mistake of trying to be friends with their kids in the first 3 phases. And that doesn't actually work. It actually usually backfires. This doesn't mean that you can't foster a great relationship with your kids or have fun with them, not at all. It just means you recognize that during these first 3 phases that what your kid needs most from you is to be their parent, not their friend. The friendship years are the reward for embracing the role of being a parent first. These phases all build upon each other. They're progressive in nature. As Nate put it, it's kind of like building a house. The discipline years are where you lay the foundation. The training years are where you erect the walls. The coaching years are when you construct the roof. And then the friendship years are when you get to enjoy what you've built. It's why if you skip a phase or you don't parent well during a phase, you can be parenting your kids for literally the rest of your life. Now, as we kicked off this series, Pastor Nate took a closer look at the discipline years, aka when your kids are 0 to 5. Now, here's the reality. Every child is born with this desire to be the ruler of his or her own kingdom. It's why some of their first words are mine and no. Scripture tells us that pride and selfishness grow in the heart of every child. It's why the heart of a child will naturally become self-absorbed and self-centered without proactive parenting. There's a book in the Bible called Proverbs, and it contains some of the best parenting advice our world has ever received. Proverbs is basically a collection of wise saying on real-life issues that train people to grow in wisdom. And it's not just a random collection of wise saying, it's written by King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, who is seeking to give his son instructions for life. And so these are some of the things that Solomon writes. He writes in Proverbs 13, verse 24, that those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them. In Proverbs 19:18, we read that discipline your children while there is hope, otherwise you will ruin their lives. Proverbs 22:15, a youngster's heart is filled with foolishness, but physical discipline will drive it far away. Proverbs 23:13-14, don't fail to discipline your children. They won't die if you spank them. Physical discipline may well save them from death. Proverbs 29:15, to discipline a child produces wisdom, but a mother is disgraced by an undisciplined child. Proverbs 29:17, discipline your son and he will give you peace. He will bring delight to your soul. Now, did you notice that every single one of these is focused on discipline? It's because King Solomon assumed that you're going to care for your child. He assumed that you're going to provide for your child. He assumed that you're going to educate your child. But he doesn't assume, just as God doesn't assume, that you're going to discipline your child. Nowadays, parents work so hard to protect their children from anything that is unpleasant, including discipline. But look what Solomon writes in Proverbs 13, verse 24. He says, those who love their children care enough to discipline them. Discipline is actually an expression of love. It shows that you care enough to serve your child's long-term interests. We've all heard horror stories of parents leaving their little ones in the backseat of a car on a hot day. And parents who do that, we question their love. Like, how could a parent ever do that? But God says failure to discipline your children is the equivalent to leaving your child in the backseat of a car. It's morally, spiritually, emotionally. God says that it's essential to their development that you step up to the plate and lovingly discipline them, because failure to do so is detrimental to their well-being. So, how do you discipline well? Well, Pastor Nate reminded us of the 5 C's and the 3 D's. The first C is to be clear. Kids should never be blindsided by discipline, as this creates confusion and insecurity. It's why parents should be clear with what they expect when it comes to the actions and the attitudes of their children. Part of that clarity is focusing your discipline on the 3 D's: disobedience, dishonesty, and disrespect. These 3 things should not be tolerated even at a young age. A child is learning and growing more quickly at that age than at any other time in their development. And it's why we need to confront these behaviors head on with firm, loving discipline. The second C is to be consistent. Always make sure that you're on the same page as your spouse. You have to work together if you're going to be successful. Plus, you always have to follow through on your word. Don't make empty threats. Don't count to 3 and then start over again. If you're going to do something, do it. Follow through, be consistent. The third C is to be calm. Never discipline in anger, because that's not discipline, that's abuse. The fourth C is to be careful. Be careful in your approach, as every child is different. The forms of discipline should vary based on the child's personality and based on their age. Finally, the fifth C is to be compassionate. The goal of discipline is not only to correct the behavior, but even more importantly, to connect with the heart. And so what we do after the form of discipline is just as important as the discipline itself. That's where you have a conversation, where you give them a hug, where you show them affection, where you reassure your child that you love them and that there's no animosity between you and them. Friends, this is how God disciplines us, not in anger, but with a heart full of compassion. And even in the midst of his discipline, he is always fighting for our hearts. He calls us to do the same. So fight for the heart of your child. Discipline with the relationship in mind. The reason why people are often afraid to discipline is because they fear losing the love of their child, but that's simply not the case. Overwhelming research and timeless truths from Scripture confirm that loving discipline doesn't drive your child away. Rather, it actually drives them towards you. It creates trust and intimacy and security. Well, friends, that's all for this week. Remember, when it comes to your kids, it's just a phase, so don't miss it. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. I'll see you next time.